BBOR Black Box Online Radio, coming to you from West Virginia at heart and from around the globe. And hello, Nedheads. Hello, Black Box Battalion. Today is Monday, another Zodiac Monday. Welcome to the show. How's everybody doing? On Mondays, I talk to you guys about the Zodiac Killer, an unidentified serial killer who operated in California in 1968 and 69. Whatever happened before or after that is still part of the mystery. And in this episode, I will be responding to Simon Whistler's video on the Zodiac Killer from the Casual Criminalist, continuing with the Zodiac Killer Casebook, and revisiting Edward Edwards as a Zodiac Killer suspect. And you guys know the drill. You can hit the like button if you want, subscribe if you haven't, and drop a comment down below if you have something to say about the Zodiac Killer. For larger things, you can send them to me at blackboxonlineradio@aol.com. And I am your host, Black Box Ned. So the first thing that I have for you guys is there will be a new video episode of a channel called the Icy Bridge Files about the Zodiac Killer that should be released at 5 p.m. today, to those of you who are listening to this as it's coming out live, and it's called the Icy Bridge Files, the Zodiac Killer Messages from the Shadows. This is a channel that I've never explored before, but it appears that they are trying to promote a new Zodiac Killer episode that is coming out. So I'm always curious what people have to say when they're giving a fresh take on the subject. The next is that there is a new video on the channel SoCal Phantoms called the Zodiac Killer's 442 cipher, and this is going to deal with certain types of mathematical combinations. 442 cipher, that is available on the channel SoCal Phantoms, SoCalFanThumbs, SoCal Phantoms. And I would also like to give a shout out to longtime Black Box Online Radio follower Joel Mahan, who sent this into the Black Box Online Radio Facebook page, and these were some photos of the Presidio Heights location where Paul Stine was murdered. Paul Stine was, of course, the final victim of the Zodiac Killer, who was murdered on October 11th of 1969. And Joel says, "Ned, I took these pics. I also shot a video and timed the walk from the cab where Paul Stine was killed to Jackson Street. It was less than 90 seconds. They missed the Zodiac Killer by 40 seconds. And, Joel also says, I walked the whole route starting at Washington Street and Maple at 9:45 p.m. Over the next 35 to 40 minutes, I only saw 3 people out walking dogs. Dead quiet. I've never been there at night and was surprised at how visible the Robbins window was. He must have been looking right at them." And the Robbins kids, of course, were the witnesses who provided the details for the Zodiac Killer's composite sketch. And this is, in 2025, this is over 50 years after the Zodiac Killer murdered Paul Stine in 1969. 56 years. So it seems like not much has changed. It seems like it's not a well-trafficked area. There aren't a lot of people out and about on the streets. And in 1969, as I understand, it was just a residential neighborhood, and it would have been after dark. So it was perhaps a place that was chosen for certain strategic purposes, where the Zodiac Killer believed that he would not be interrupted when he was trying to commit a murder. So this just goes more and more into the fact, or into the hypothesis, of the Zodiac Killer mapping out his crime scenes, having a solid exit strategy. And one thing that I really tend to dismiss is the idea of the Zodiac Killer being brash and brazen, someone who is just reckless and careless, and he just got lucky. Oh yes, luck was involved with it. As you just heard, they perhaps could have intercepted him if he had been 40 seconds slower, but that's not necessarily what the Zodiac was doing. The Zodiac was smart, and he was somebody who put thought into his crimes, and it seems like he had reasons why he chose the locations. He probably had his entire getaway planned. It was just a very small window, and he was able to sneak his way through the window. Now, I told you guys that I was going to talk about Simon Whistler's video on the Zodiac Killer. He runs a channel called the Casual Criminalist, and he is somebody who has really taken over YouTube. To be honest with you, I have no idea how many channels he runs, how many different types of subjects he talks about. He also hosts a channel called Mega Projects, which does stuff like the world's largest cruise ship and so on. And the way that he approaches videos for the Casual Criminalist is he sits down with a script that he has not previewed, and he just reads it off and starts talking about it. And he'll say something like, "Oh yeah, the Zodiac Killer, I talked about that before when I was working on the Biographics channel." Stuff like that, but he doesn't do the original research into the case. One of his writers does. And I think that it's a twofold issue. The first is, he can't verify any of the information unless it's something that he remembers from the past. He is not a subject matter expert on anything that he is talking about. He can't verify the errors or spot mistakes, but at the same time he does give a very, very fresh take on the subject. It is literally the concept of a fresh set of eyes on the situation, and because he has read about a lot of true crime cases in the past, I do think that he is a very smart and insightful individual. And you don't need to take my word for it. As I said, you've probably seen something from him. He has, I don't even know how many YouTube channels floating around online. So in terms of his responses to the Zodiac Killer, he was at first being extremely, extremely silly, and even apologized for his behavior later on in the video by saying that, "All right, I understand this is a murder case." It seemed like he had just recorded something else. He still had some energy from a lighthearted subject, and he was making fun of the substance material. And that really goes into the category of, this is just not something that should be used purely for entertainment. And I don't listen to any true crime comedy podcast. I have a boycott on BuzzFeed here on Black Box Online Radio because I really think they overdid the entertainment aspects of it, and I do not watch or discuss any of their videos. But I wanted to look at some of his original observations about the Zodiac Killer mystery. And the first thing that stood out to me was, he did not think the Zodiac Killer was intelligent. You've already heard everything that I said about the Zodiac Killer and the Presidio Heights crime scene. It seemed to me that the Zodiac had a reasonable or fair amount of intelligence, but he was actually thinking that the Zodiac Killer was a relatively dumb person, and he said that many times in his video, and I'm just thinking, well, what exactly would be the rationale for that? And the Zodiac Killer was not only a serial killer, he was also somebody who wrote letters and ciphers, and he designed diagrams, and of course the famous Zodiac Killer symbol. And one of the things that Simon Whistler was doing was, he was highlighting certain portions of the Zodiac letters, and then saying that, yeah, this doesn't sound like an educated person. The exact phrase that he used multiple times in his video was that this seems like somebody who is either genuinely dumb or that he's uneducated. And some people who would completely agree with that would be the Consult podcast. The profilers who worked on the Consult podcast more or less came to the same conclusion. They were like, this guy most likely did not have a university education because he's writing these letters that are just filled with misspellings. And yes, he's creating ciphers, but he's also making mistakes while he's doing it. It didn't seem like someone who had to submit university term papers. Instead, it seemed like someone who was just kind of winging it or throwing together their own lackluster creation. Which one do you agree with? That can be the first challenge question of the day. Do you think the Zodiac had higher education, or do you think that he did not have higher education? And if you have something to support your statement, you can put your idea in the comments section down below. One more time, like and subscribe. Now, one of the things that Simon Whistler did in his presentation which was 2 hours and 40 minutes long, is he was actually reading most of the Zodiac Killer letters and cipher solutions verbatim. And let's start with one of them that he shared, because he actually said something to the effect of, it didn't seem like the person who wrote the Zodiac Killer's debut letter was the type of person to write a cipher. To give you an example of what he's talking about, let's look at this here. The Zodiac Killer wrote his first letter on July 31st of 1969, or okay. That's the date that's attributed to it. Maybe we don't actually know when he wrote it, but this is the Zodiac Killer's debut letter. Dear Editor, this is the murderer of the two teenagers last Christmas at Lake Herman and the girl on the 4th of July near the golf course in Vallejo. To prove I killed them, I shall state some facts which only I and the police know. Christmas. Brand of ammo was Super X. 10 shots were fired. The boy was on his back with his feet to the car, and the girl was on her right side, feet to the west. 4th of July. The girl was wearing patterned slacks, and the boy was also shot in the knee. Brand name of ammo was Western. Turn the page over. Here is part of a cipher, and the other two parts of this cipher are being mailed to the editors of the Vallejo Times and San Francisco Examiner. I want you to print this cipher on the front page of your paper. In this cipher is my identity. If you do not print this cipher, by the afternoon of Friday 1st of August 69, I will go on a kill rampage Friday night. I will cruise around all weekend, killing lone people in the night, and then move on to kill again, until I end up with a dozen people over the weekend. And the exact response that he provided was, wow, it doesn't seem like the author of this letter was the type of person who would create a cipher. And I don't know about you guys, but I was just sitting back, on my couch listening to that. It doesn't seem like the author of this letter was the type of person to create a cipher or a cryptogram. And I was thinking, well, what type of person would create a cipher or a cryptogram? What type of person has an interest in cryptology? What type of person would make something like the Zodiac Killer's 408 cipher? There isn't just one single type of person that's going to create a cipher or a cryptogram or a code. And one thing that I think he was heavily downplaying was that it seems that perhaps the Zodiac Killer could have learned about codes in the Navy. And I mean, maybe he didn't have formal education in the university, but he could have learned about them in the Navy or the Air Force or a different part of the military. And that would still be a form of education. And moreover, though, I think one of the biggest things that was dragging down his opinion of the Zodiac Killer's intelligence was these misspellings. And I just want to share something with you guys. Some people believe that the Zodiac Killer couldn't spell words, and they believe that the Zodiac Killer maybe had dyslexia, or there's some other type of issue that's going on, like what the Console podcast said. They were thinking that the Zodiac Killer was the type of person who didn't have formal education because he submitted all of these letters with misspellings. But I'm going to read one section of the debut letter to you again. If you do not print this cipher by the afternoon of Friday 1st, August 69, I will go on a kill rampage Friday night. Okay, very clearly the word Friday is misspelled, and it's not even abbreviated appropriately. It's not F-R-I for Friday, it's F-R-Y, Friday night, Friday 1st of August 69. The misspelling is consistent. The Zodiac Killer was also consistent throughout his letters with other misspellings. Christmas, spelled Christ Mass, and Paradise, spelled P-A-R-A-D-I-C-E. And I was just thinking, that to me is evidence that the Zodiac Killer was intentionally misspelling words. It sounds like it's his own personal way of writing it, and it's something that he may have been doing for comedic effect. Of course, Drew Beeson, author of Sighting In on the Zodiac Killer, likes to say, well, that's because maybe he had a relative named Fryer who spelled the name F-R-Y-R-E-A-R, but pronounced it Fryer. And overall, though, that does not seem like a mistake that would have been made because of mild dyslexia, or a mistake that's made because of any other unintentional reason. The fact that this guy made the same misspelling in the same paragraph, and it's done in the exact same manner and fashion, that to me indicates that this person is doing it intentionally with something extremely simple. Friday. If it were because of some type of learning disability, you would really expect it to be inconsistent, or that if he's not paying attention, maybe then you wouldn't have the same misspelling in the same paragraph. But the Zodiac Killer seems like he is paying attention, and I just have a lot of trouble thinking that the Zodiac is dumb, or even that the Zodiac was uneducated. Let me know what you think. But one thing that Simon Whistler also did in his videos was he read off the solutions to the Zodiac Killer's ciphers. The Zodiac has two confirmed ciphers that have been solved, the Z408 and the Z340. But one thing that he did was he didn't read the corrections. Even though we were talking about the Zodiac Killer misspellings, well, he also misspelled things in the ciphers, and Simon Whistler just read them off with the misspelling in place. To give you an example, he would say with the 408, I like killing people because it is so much fun. It is more fun than killing wild game in the forest, because man is the most dangereux animal of all. To kill something gives me the most thrilling experience. It is even better than getting your rocks off with a girl. The best part of it is that when I die, I will be reborn in paradise, and all I have killed will become my slaves. I will not give you my name because you will try to sloy down or atop my collectiog of slaves for my afterlife. EBEORIETEMETHHPITI. Okay, though, so that was the Z18 code at the end, and as you see, the Z408 cipher is also filled with misspellings. But overall, though, I mean, what really is different between that language and the language of the debut letter? Did you hear anything in that text there that might indicate that the Zodiac Killer did not write it? This whole statement about the author of the debut letter doesn't seem like the type of person to create ciphers, codes, or cryptograms because he's too dumb. Well, I mean, he's talking about different subjects in the code, like wild game in the forest and talking about slaves in paradise. But overall, I didn't think that the language structure was any more advanced. I didn't think that the language structure was any more complicated. And I also really didn't think that it's anything that is, beyond the scope of what the Zodiac Killer's intelligence would indicate. And also, we have to bear in mind that it's possible that the Zodiac Killer may have been trying to fool us, that he's just constantly trolling. He's just constantly downplaying his intelligence and upplaying his intelligence. He's doing things in a confusing way so that people can't respond to him because he doesn't want them to know the truth. He doesn't want them to know what he's really thinking. And why do people do this? Maybe we'll talk about this later on in the episode. If you can't understand what the person is truly thinking, then you can't really criticize them. And this seems like a narcissistic cover-up for insecurity. The whole concept of, to challenge someone, at first you have to understand them. And if you don't understand their true message, then you can't really challenge them. But let's look at the other solution that they read off for the 340 cipher, and this is the other one that Simon Whistler read. And again, he was trying to do this with the misspellings, but I'm even going to read a corrected one. And it says, I hope you are having lots of fun in trying to catch me. That wasn't me on the TV show, which brings up a point about me. I am not afraid of the gas chamber because it will send me to paradise all the sooner, because I now have enough slaves to work for me, where everyone else has nothing when they reach paradise, so they are afraid of death. I'm not afraid because I know that my new life will be an easy one, paradise death. And it also seems that maybe the Zodiac is making mistakes with the position of his words, but I don't see anything there that is unintelligent. I don't see anything there that is of someone that doesn't necessarily sound like an uneducated person to me. What do you think? And furthermore, I think he was heavily downplaying how complex the 340 cipher was. You guys know better than anyone. It took 51 years, was it 50 some odd years, to solve the 340 cipher? That required a certain amount of know-how. And I guess you'd say I'm not of the opinion that the Zodiac was a super genius, but I don't think that he was dumb or uneducated, and I don't think that highlighting his little misspellings are going to be things that are going to point to low intelligence, and I don't think the substance of his letters or these cipher solutions that I've just read to you are evidence of his low intelligence. I think that it's average, and I mean, I don't see anything that rules out the Zodiac having higher education. And right now, I would like to get to your supporter shoutouts. You can support this channel at buymeacoffee.com, buymeacoffee.com/blackboxned88. and that allows you to make a donation or contribution to help support the show, and anybody who makes a donation will get a shout out on Zodiac Monday. And our first one comes to us from Batman66. Batman66, thank you so much for your regular and consistent support. Batman bought you a coffee. I never get tired of saying that. And Batman66 has also been helping out a lot with the shorts and reels that come out Monday through Friday here on YouTube, Facebook, and Instagram. I'm using the Black Box Online Radio Facebook page more, but many of you guys know my Facebook name is Ned DeHaan, and the shorts are also released on Instagram, blackboxonlineradio. Last week I was mostly concentrating on Jack the Ripper related shorts, but I usually talk about serial killers, true crime news, and any subject under the sun or in the darkness, sometimes Zodiac Killer books and Jack the Ripper books. Batman66 says, I've been enjoying BBOR's Jack the Ripper episodes. And yes, every Wednesday is Ripper Wednesday here on Black Box Online Radio, where I do a regular segment about Jack the Ripper, and I invite you guys to check that out. Also, on Thursdays about the Black Dahlia, and on Fridays about D.B. Cooper. And our next one goes to Quentin Broom. This is a long overdue shout out, and Quentin Broom joined the Black Box Online Radio monthly support available on buymeacoffee.com, and Quentin informed me that he has not been getting his shout-outs, so it seems like I have a lot of catching up to do. So, Quentin Broom, you can expect some shout-outs over the course of the next several Zodiac Mondays, because, as I like to tell you guys, everybody who supports this channel on Zodiac Monday on buymeacoffee.com should get a shout-out on Zodiac Monday, and I want to live by that. So, Quentin, look out for some more. And then we have River Prawn Pottery, another regular and consistent support. River Prawn Pottery, thank you so much for supporting Black Box Online Radio. And River Prawn Pottery is the one who recommended the Dark Matters podcast, which is hosted by Dr. Eric Hickey, and he also wrote the book Serial Murderers and Their Victims, which I was discussing last week on Zodiac Monday. And Dr. Eric Hickey released a new video on the Dark Matters podcast, and he is now appearing on camera. It appeared that the early episodes were done in the podcast format with just the Dark Matters logo on the screen, but he is now appearing on camera, and he did a Halloween episode where he was talking about a personal Halloween story involving true crime cases. And I'm definitely going to be following the Dark Matters podcast, and I invite you to do so as well. And our next shout-out goes to CZ Guy. CZ Guy, thank you so much for your regular and consistent support, and it wouldn't be complete without all of you guys. But CZ Guy, I appreciate everything that you have done for Black Box Online Radio, and I will also be making the announcement that next Monday, there will not be a Zodiac Monday, because I'm actually going to get married. Yes, my wedding date happened to fall on a Monday. I don't know how that happened. It's the anniversary that my fiancé and I had the day we met from years and years ago, well before Zodiac Monday was even a thing, so that might have something to do with it. But ultimately, it just happened to land on a Monday. This year, my birthday and my wedding day happened to be on Zodiac Monday, so sometimes life is just lining things up, the stars are coming into alignment, but at the same time, I can't lie, I'm a little bit looking forward to my own wedding. Imagine if I wasn't, you know what I mean? But anyway, there will not be a Zodiac Monday next week. However, the regularly scheduled lineup should come out, and I look forward to catching up with you guys in the future about the Zodiac Killer. And to continue with this week's Zodiac Killer News Report, I would like to talk to you guys about a recent book that came out called the Zodiac Killer Casebook by L.J. Clark. I think that this is a really fascinating book, and there is a Zodiac Killer News Report Casebook edition where I looked at the early sections, and I think the intention of this book is to lay out all of the Zodiac Killer's forensic material and discuss it. At first, there's an introduction to the Zodiac Killer mystery, then there is a discussion on forensics and how different types of forensic evidence are collected, and then ultimately applying those collections to the Zodiac Killer case. And the next thing that is discussed in the Zodiac Killer Casebook, this is a new section for Zodiac Monday, is the composite sketches. And I would like to give a shout out to L.J. Clark, the author of this one. I'm going to have a read right here. Based on the Presidio Heights composite, Zodiac suspects have been ruled in or out. Is the drawing accurate? While forensic sketches can help generate leads or assemble a police lineup, they can also hinder a criminal investigation. Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. I'm just going to say it right now. I don't think that any suspect should be eliminated because of no resemblance to the Presidio Heights composite sketch, that no suspect should be eliminated because they didn't wear glasses, that no suspect should be eliminated because they have a slightly different head shape. The things that are much more important to pay attention to are being tall, or being short, or that somebody is just outside of the parameters, 5 feet 8 inches tall to 6 feet tall, maybe 6'1" could cut it. Maybe, just maybe, some way, somehow, a 5'7" guy with platform shoes that he wore all the time could cut it. And yes, I'm being a little bit facetious there with the 5'7" thing, but ultimately, just because someone does not look like the composite sketch does not mean they should be eliminated, and just because somebody looks like the composite sketch, it does not mean they should be taken more seriously. And then let's keep going here. There is substantial risk that an innocent person may be wrongly implicated simply because they resemble a composite sketch, or because they believe someone believes they do. Yes, so many people do this. I cannot tell you how many times on Zodiac Monday I've heard the story of, well, somebody, knew someone who lived in California in the 1960s. And they resembled the Zodiac Killer's composite sketch, so they started to look into this person. They wore dark-rimmed glasses, they had short hair, they were a white Caucasian male, so people began investigating them. The only thing that I think justifies that is that we want to leave no stone unturned. The Zodiac Killer has not yet been identified, so we can't just say, oh yeah, well, we're not going to talk about this person because that's all they have. I will hear people out, and I will consider it, but I must say, it's like a giant red flag. It's just like a giant warning signal, an alarm bell that goes off if they say, well, I know someone from California and they look like the sketch. So what? Everybody does. Literally, almost everybody does. And even in the thumbnail of Simon Whistler's video, it really seems like they tried to combine his appearance with that of the Zodiac Killer. He, of course, was bald and bearded, but they tried to combine that with the composite sketch to make it look like he could pass as the Zodiac Killer. There are so many similarities that any white Caucasian male is going to have to the Zodiac Killer composite sketch. I agree completely. Composites aren't very accurate. Given all the science and the wrongful convictions that support the data, composite sketches played a role in 30% of wrongful convictions overturned by DNA evidence. You see, DNA evidence is so much more powerful, and to the credit of L.J. Clark, this is a book that also just wants to ring the alarm bell once again and say, we might not have the Zodiac Killer's DNA. It appears that there was DNA taken from the outside of a stamp that was on one of the Zodiac letters, but if it's from the outside of the stamp, we can't verify that that's from the killer, and I think that that's great stuff to share in a book, so thank you to L.J. Clark. Several factors can diminish the accuracy of eyewitness identifications: extreme stress during the crime or the identification process, the presence of a weapon, the perpetrator's use of disguises such as masks or wigs, racial disparities between the witness and the suspect. Racial disparities isn't something that we encounter too much in the Zodiac Killer case, but it's definitely something that we encounter in the true crime world. For example, I do a segment every Friday about D.B. Cooper Friday here on Black Box Online Radio, and one of the things we were talking about last week is, could D.B. Cooper have been a Latino? Could he have been a Native American? And somebody, his name was Robert Fuller, said, no, he wasn't a Latino. No, he wasn't a Native American. People know what Latinos look like. People know what Native Americans look like. D.B. Cooper was a Caucasian male with a dark complexion. And I'm just saying, whoa, I mean, I mostly agree with you. But there isn't just one way that Latinos look. There isn't just one way that Native Americans look. And just to say that you know immediately whether or not somebody has Latino heritage or Native American heritage is too extreme of a statement. And absolutely, this type of stuff should be applied to the Zodiac Killer mystery as well. And also, certain things can be hidden and not be distracted from a composite sketch, and it doesn't hold up to things like distinctive characteristics in the suspect, such as tattoos or unusual height. Oh yes, I think what L.J. Clark is trying to say is, if the Zodiac Killer had a tattoo of some kind, that would be so easy to identify. That would be so much more valuable than just saying, well, he had short hair and glasses. That's really all you have with the composite sketch. Forensic sketches rely on memory, which is often unreliable and subject to error. Mistaken eyewitness accounts have been significant in hundreds of wrongful convictions. Although L.J. Clark does provide several examples of the book of a composite sketch of Jeffrey Dahmer when he was the unarrested Milwaukee cannibal, and it does look somewhat like him. But also, the Son of Sam case is one that has been heavily plagued by inappropriate composite sketches. But you guys know the drill. You guys know what's going on. Composite sketches aren't always reliable. But there's a section in L.J. Clark's book that is actually written by an individual named Greg McCrary, and this says the profile of the Zodiac Killer. And I've referenced Greg McCrary's material in the past for the Black Dahlia episodes that I do on Thursday, but I'm going to read this for you here. The killer constantly changed his methods of operating and openly admitted that murder was a sport for him. The attacks occurred at dusk, after dark, on weekends, and around holidays, and different weapons were used with no motive and save violence for itself. And I think that's just something that's a description of the Zodiac Killer rather than an argumentative statement. He changed his method, and he used different types of weapons, and he went after people after dark, on weekends, often around holidays. Yes, okay, fair enough. The killer wanted credit for them. He turned most of his rage against females. No. See, now here is where we're getting to something that's very important. The killer turned most of his rage against females? How? How did the Zodiac Killer do that? What does the murder of Paul Stein have to do with murdering a woman? A woman wasn't even present. There was no female victim at the Stein murder. Moreover, at Lake Herman Road, it appears that the killer tried to shoot the male victim first so that he could subdue him, get him out of the way, and then he would have access to the female victim. And the same is most likely true at Blue Rock Springs. The same is most likely true at Lake Berryessa. But that's not hatred. That's not rage. That's being tactical. I think Richard Grinnell of ZodiacCiphers.com was the first person that I heard to say there is no evidence that the Zodiac Killer hated women. I mean, turned most of his rage against females? Where? Because he stabbed Cecilia Shepard 10 times at Lake Berryessa and Brian Hartnell 6 times? Other than that, where is there evidence that the Zodiac Killer had more rage against females? I simply think that it's not present. Possible motives were to prove his superiority, get attention, control the investigation, create a terroristic climate, and relive the crimes via media reports. Going after couples, which he did 3 times, could indicate that he was envious because he did not or could not have that kind of relationship. Again, I don't think that that's anything argumentative. That seems descriptive. The only point that we can challenge is we don't truly know why the Zodiac Killer was going after couples. You know, some people think it's about the location. Some people think that it was just they were the victims that happened to be there. Other people think that it was all calculated and designed. Other people think that there were connections among the victims and they were specific targets. There are many theories, but this early stuff that he wanted superiority to get attention, control the investigation, and create a terroristic climate, again, that's not an argumentative statement. That's a descriptive statement. The Zodiac did all of that, and I would say that that's mostly irrefutable. The Zodiac was trying to act like he was superior, control the investigation. Hey, pigs, doesn't it rally you up to have your nose rubbed in your boo-boos? Yeah, that's pretty much what he's doing. Create a terroristic climate? The Zodiac literally drew out bomb diagrams and said he was going to annihilate a school bus, and they didn't know where and when he was going to do this. He said he had a bomb buried. He said that he was going to go on a kill rampage. Absolutely, the Zodiac Killer was trying to make terroristic threats and create a terroristic climate. I completely agree with that part. It might also have been to show that he was not afraid to confront a male, although the fact that he targeted 3 couples when he could have only shot the lone females or lone males indicates resentment about a relationship. Once again, does the Zodiac really resent people who are in relationships? How do we know that that's why the Zodiac did that? He could have gone after people who were just in specific locations. And to be very honest with you, the reason why I keep saying that is I'm thinking about the Zodiac Killer's Lake Berryessa stabbing, and I tend to think more and more that he chose that place because of the location. Maybe he visited it 5 or 6 times. He was like, okay, I'm going to commit the crime, then I'm going to walk away, I'm going to exit this way. This is the path that I'm going to use so that I will not be seen by people walking away from the crime scene. This is my getaway, and it's all arranged. And let's say, hypothetically, if 2 women had been present at Lake Berryessa, just 2 female friends, maybe he would have gone after them. And maybe if 2 men had been present, he would have gone after them. We aren't sure. We simply do not have enough information. Some of you longtime listeners to Black Box Online Radio might be aware that in the past, I absolutely dismissed the concept of the Lake Berryessa voyeur being the Zodiac Killer. The Lake Berryessa voyeur was seen looking at 3 girls for an extended period of time, and I was just thinking, no, the Zodiac didn't target lone females. He targeted couples. Now I'm forced to admit that I do not know, because like almost everything in the Zodiac Killer mystery, it's ambiguous. It's just not pointing in any specific direction. To give you an example of evidence that might point in a specific direction, I have to give a shout out to Vincent McConnell, who runs the New Cokes channel, and he talks a lot about the Golden State Killer, the East Area Rapist, Original Night Stalker, and he shared a story of how Michelle McNamara, who wrote the book I'll Be Gone in the Dark, once stole a DNA report from a lab, and she misinterpreted it, thinking that the Golden State Killer was somebody of German descent, when in reality he was Joseph D'Angelo of Italian-American descent. But if we had the DNA of the killer, and then we could determine the killer's ethnicity, then it would be so much easier to evaluate suspects. Let's say, hypothetically, we had the DNA of the Zodiac Killer, and it said, we're looking for somebody who has Italian ancestry, a full-blooded Italian. Well, then somebody like Giuseppe Bevilacqua is going to go to the top of the list, and somebody like Arthur Lee Allen is going to fall in the list. Allen had Norwegian ancestry, by the way, and ultimately, those types of details just are not present. But what I think also is not present is, we don't necessarily know that the Zodiac had resentment about relationships. He may have just wanted to kill, and Brian and Cecilia were the victims that he encountered at Lake Berryessa. I don't know that as a fact. That is just the hypothesis that I'm going with for the present. Then the next sentence here in the Zodiac Killer Casebook. He liked to ambush his victims, yet for him, none of these incidents were high-risk crimes. While they were out in the open, they were not at risk. Even when he set himself up for a potential risk, such as being interviewed by phone, he usually withdrew it. Well, the Zodiac Killer being interviewed by phone, I don't know if you're talking about the dispatchers that he talked to, like Nancy Slover. I wouldn't call that an interview, because he didn't give them much time to respond. He didn't stay on the line for very long. If you mean the interview that he did with Melvin Belli on the Jim Dunbar show, I absolutely do not think that was the Zodiac Killer. It's also not widely accepted that the Zodiac Killer called the Jim Dunbar show. Why? I've already told you in this episode the Zodiac Killer denied it completely. He's the one who said that wasn't me on the TV show. Okay, so let's keep going here. Yet it's possible that he believed he was taking a risk, so that he could congratulate himself when he did not get caught. And I have to give a shout out to Justice from Justice Talks True Crime, and Justice wrote out a comment about how it seems like at a certain point, maybe after 1969, maybe in the start of 1970, the Zodiac Killer seems like he is going to take credit for crimes, but he's never going to do it directly. He's going to say very vague statements, so he can't be embarrassed. There is some of this here about how he's going to make a statement and then withdraw it. The possible crimes that he could have taken credit for would be the Kathleen Johns incident. It could be the murder of Richard Redditich. I shot a man sitting in a parked car with a .38. And also Sherry Joe Bates, you stumbled upon my Riverside activity. These are just vague allusions. He's just alluding to the fact that he did something with some type of victim in a similar circumstance. And there is absolutely nothing to suggest that the Zodiac Killer actually committed any of those crimes. Oh yes, we can spin the hamster wheel as long as we want, but in terms of hard evidence, I just really don't think it's there. But let's keep going here. He might have fantasized about himself being more daring than he actually was. Well, that's the entire concept of the overinflated ego. And I'm going to share something with you guys that might not be the best for Zodiac Monday, but I was actually watching an interview with Jason Alexander, who played George Costanza on Seinfeld. And he was talking about his character, about how his character had an overinflated ego, but he also had moments of doubt and feelings of worthlessness, and it was all in perfect balance. It was with the Archive of American Television. They have some great interviews there. And with this one, Jason Alexander said something that I thought was very profound, and that was that to understand the dichotomy of the ego, you cannot be at either extreme. Like, if you're just in the overinflated thing, I am so great, I am wonderful, or if you're in the opposite extreme, I am worthless, I am terrible, then you will not truly understand human behavior. So for people like us, we have a real opportunity to look at the Zodiac Killer's actions and recognize, is he going on the worthless side or is he going on the overinflated side? What it appears that he did was, to me, he started out by being extremely overinflated, and the more time that he wrote letters, the more this just turned into a giant ploy for attention. I mean, I cannot get over this stuff. By 1970, he's just saying, wear some Zodiac Killer buttons, and if you don't, I'm going to tie you over an anthill, and I'm just going to feel really good that you won't be missed and you're being tortured and such. It's all just turning into pathetic little whining. And that's really what the Zodiac Killer is doing in 1970. And by 1971, he's writing, 2 communications, 1 letter and 1 card, and then everything just goes silent. So it's almost as if the Zodiac Killer's persona became burned out. And what did we say on a recent episode of Zodiac Monday? The Zodiac was running out of murderous energy. I think that was in Gerald Gregory Doan's book, Flirting with the Executioner. He runs out of murderous energy in 1969. Then, in 1970, he runs out of communication energy. He no longer wants to talk about himself because he's already told you, I am so powerful, I kill people, they are my slaves. Okay, I'm actually kind of bored with this. Okay, here's 1 more card. And then the Zodiac disappears for 2 years, the Holton Zodiac Killer activity. Is it possible that the Zodiac just got burnt out? Is it possible that this was no longer exciting and stimulating for him? I'm beginning to think so. It wouldn't be surprising that his fantasies of being a skilled hunter grew from an immature and insecure mind. That's what we're saying, though, about the dichotomy of the ego. He's putting on this overinflated front, and he's creating this overinflated persona to distract everybody from the fact that he has an immature and insecure mind. Now we're getting somewhere. Nevertheless, the man who called himself the Zodiac was organized, intelligent, and meticulous. There you go, Simon Whistler. That could be my biggest response to the Casual Criminalist video from Simon Whistler. Just saying. Something to the effect of, the Zodiac actually was organized, intelligent, and meticulous. I don't see any evidence that he was dumb and educated. By the way, though, Simon Whistler's video was 2 hours and 40 minutes long. Being very honest, I made it through the first 1 hour and 20 minutes, so I'll probably do a follow-up where I discuss the final segments. That might be worked into the end of a future Zodiac Monday or something. Let's keep going here. If we take the reference to the Zodiac seriously, we find several symbols in his initial cryptogram that look like the symbol for Taurus, the bull, which could identify his approximate birth date. Okay, now, this one here, Greg, the person who wrote this profile for the Zodiac Killer, I was on board with you. Even with the stuff about Rage Against Women, I didn't agree with that, but I thought that most of what you were saying was actually pretty good. Then you're going to say something like this? Looked like the symbol for Taurus the bull, which could identify his approximate birth date? This guy was making sense, and then all of a sudden, just springboarded and skyrocketed into the clouds. I do not think there's any evidence that the Zodiac Killer left any clues to his birth date, and even if that turns out to be true, that would just be like a hunch, a wild guess that got lucky. I mean, the fact of the matter is, the Zodiac did not point any clues into the ciphers that would indicate that we're looking for his birth date, that he's giving away his birth date, that the symbols resemble something that is connected to his birth date. Even if that were true, this person just got lucky. Those close to the Zodiac would probably have heard him engage in knowledgeable discussions about astrological symbols and meanings. Okay, now this statement is completely different. Saying that he put clues to his birth date in the ciphers versus he seems like the guy that would talk about astrology. Well, if your suspect is Richard Gaikowski, this profiler is your man. He really is spot on for you, because he's talking all about how... I mean, Richard Gaikowski is the subject of the book The Only Time Richard Got Angry at Me by James Bigtwin. And in that book, very clearly, James Bigtwin says, the only time Richard got angry at him was because James said that astrology was not a legitimate science. And then Richard got angry at him because he actually recognized a very strong value of astrology. Well, anyway, that was a profile that was shared in the Zodiac Killer Casebook by L.J. Clark. The specific section was a profile created by Greg McCrary. And, I mean, as you can see, I'm definitely fascinated by the Zodiac Killer Casebook. It is a book that has lots of ideas, things that I can respond to, and I'm going to keep going through it. But I also told you guys that I was going to be talking about a different Zodiac Killer suspect in this episode, and that is Edward Wayne Edwards, because there is a blog out there that was created by George Barwood, and it's called the Ed Edwards Serial Killer WordPress. And you can find it under the title of Edward Wayne Edwards, Serial Killer and FBI Mob Fixer. And Edward Wayne Edwards is a suspect that I think gets pulled into two categories. The first is, there is a very concentrated effort to simply identify Edward Wayne Edwards as the Zodiac Killer, and then there is a much broader effort where it just explodes into a giant web of interconnected theories about how Edward Wayne Edwards was responsible for every crime under the sun or in the darkness. Or as some other people have pointed out, maybe he just wrote letters about other crimes, as opposed to actually being the murderer or the perpetrator. And I asked George Barwood if he was familiar with some of the other Edwards material that I had discussed on the channel. I've had the opportunity to interview Tim Spencer, who's the author of 55, The Zodiac Killer Identified, and I've also done a book discussion on Zodiac Letters, Edward Wayne Edwards by Jason Hughes. And George responded to me by saying that he has not read Tim's book, but he has familiarized himself with the work of Jason Hughes. I invite you guys to check out my book discussion. And if you are not familiar with Tim Spencer's ideas, then you can find that in my interview that I did with him, and that is called The Zodiac Killer's Secret Cipher Message with Tim Spencer, here on Zodiac Monday. Overall, though, I think that both of them are looking at how Edward Wayne Edwards was a real serial killer, but he also used lots of wordplay and cipher play. Let's look at the Edward Wayne Edwards WordPress. Edward Wayne Edwards was likely born Charles Edward Myers on May 30th, 1928, and not Charles Murray on June 14th of 1933. So Edward Wayne Edwards was not his real name, and he was 5 years older than many people believe. And he was born the day before his unmarried mother's 17th birthday. When he was 10, his mother died, and in 1940 he was sent to an orphanage where he was severely abused. In December of 1945, he killed Frances Brown and went on to commit many more crimes such as burglary, armed robbery, arson, and multiple murders. After being dishonorably discharged from the Marines, he spent 3 years in Deer Lodge Prison, Montana from 1956 to 59. In 1961, he was added to the FBI's 10 Most Wanted Fugitives. He was arrested on January 20th, 1962 in Atlanta and sentenced to federal charges. So it seems like the foundation of this theory is Edward Wayne Edwards has connections to many parts of the country. He moved around the United States a lot. He committed other crimes. So then people take the existing framework, almost like a skeleton, a skeletal system of truth, and then people like John Cameron will expand this into a much larger web of fiction where he's saying that Edward Wayne Edwards murdered 660 people. And that was a criticism of John Cameron, not George Barwood or his blog. In a letter dated July 9th, 1993, to the FBI found in the Edwards papers, Edward Wayne Edwards requested his criminal history and records for cities in 19 states, traveling around skeletal system, and J. Edgar Hoover claimed that more or less gave me permission to proceed with a 1972 autobiography after I assured him that there was nothing bad in it about the FBI. Oh, then people are going to hear something like that, and that's also going to become fodder for conspiracy theories. The FBI knew the whole time, because he said so. More than 20 people are thought to have been wrongly convicted for Edwards' crimes. Any reasonable person will doubt the truth of these extraordinary claims, but once you have read and understood the totality of the evidence, you should agree that Edward Wayne Edwards was one of the most cunning and manipulative serial killers in U.S. history. And one more time, this was the writings of George Barwood on ededwardsserialkiller.wordpress.com. What do we make of this here? What do you guys think about that? I am in the category right now of yes, I don't completely comprehend the narrative. Yes, I think that it's too outrageous. But also, we have to look at the different variants of the theories. One is that Edward Wayne Edwards may have written letters about murders that he did not commit to confuse the authorities. That's really the subject of the Jason Hughes books. He has 2 volumes out in Zodiac Letters, Edward Wayne Edwards, when he just says, Edward Wayne Edwards may have been the most prolific serial killer letter writer in history. So I think that that's where I'm going to leave it for now. And what do you think about that? Do you think that Edward Wayne Edwards was manipulating evidence? Do you think that he was trying to pull fast ones on people? Do you think that this is what he would have wanted, for people to think that he was the most prolific serial killer in history because he's planting false evidence? Or, I will offer you a challenge. Do you think that people have just misunderstood the narrative? Do you think it's what I said about the skeletal system of the theory, that they're looking at how he was living in different parts of the country, different crimes took place, so then they're thinking, oh, well then Edwards must have committed the different crimes, and then he also wrote the fake letters to cover up for it, and then it gets bigger and bigger and bigger, where ultimately he's accused of 660 murders. But I'm definitely hoping to talk to George Barwood in the future, because I'm always curious what other people have to say about these ideas. And I also want to thank you guys for listening to this week's Zodiac Monday. I really appreciate each and every one of you. And, you guys really make Black Box Online Radio a strong channel, and this channel is not slowing down anytime soon. But I also want to say that this show comes to you Monday through Friday, talking about the Zodiac Killer, the disappearance of Maura Murray, Jack the Ripper, the Black Dahlia, and D.B. Cooper. I also release the shorts and reels. And you guys know where to write the show, blackboxonlineradio@aol.com, Blackbox Online Radio on Facebook, Blackbox Ned 88 on Instagram. You already know about the buymeacoffee.com page. This show is available for free downloads anywhere you get your podcasts under the names Black Box Podcast or Black Box True Crime. And you can also get the images that you see going by on the screen available at True Crime Designs. True Crime Designs on Facebook. And I will see you guys on Tuesday for a new episode about the disappearance of Maura Murray. That's all for me now. Everybody have a wonderful Monday, and look out for the new episode that will be coming out. And goodbye.